Have you ever had a neighbor who just couldn't mind their own business? Well, I did, and this story is all about how an HOA Karen demanded my Wi-Fi password. Yeah, you heard that right. One day, out of nowhere, she knocks on my door with the most ridiculous request. Apparently, she was having connection issues and thought it was totally fine to ask me for my Wi-Fi password. But here's the thing, I'd barely even spoken to this person before. It was like something out of a sitcom, and I just couldn't believe she was serious. I mean, how entitled can someone get? But instead of just saying no and ending the conversation right there, I decided to have a little fun. I knew this was my chance to get back at the Karen who was always nosing around, poking her head into everyone's business. So, I came up with the perfect name for my Wi-Fi network, one that she'd never forget. But it didn't end there. She was mad. Like, really mad. And I was left wondering how far she would go to get her way. Was this just the beginning of a battle with the neighborhood Karen, or was I about to unleash a whole new level of drama? Stick around to find out how this little prank turned into something much bigger than I ever imagined. Before all of this, my interactions with Karen had been minimal. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone keeps to themselves and doesn't get involved in each other's lives. Until the HOA starts sending out those newsletters with new rules, of course. Karen was one of the self-appointed neighborhood watch types, always lurking around, pointing out little things like a stray leaf on a lawn or a broken fence panel that didn't meet the HOA standards. At first, I thought she was just a little overzealous, but then I started noticing the way she treated people. If you didn't follow every single rule to the letter, she'd have something to say about it. The other neighbors were terrified of her, avoiding eye contact whenever they passed her house. I've always kept my distance, but I didn't expect her to come knocking on my door one day, especially with such a bizarre request. When she asked for my Wi-Fi password, I didn't know whether to laugh or just shut the door in her face. But the thing is, she wasn't joking. There was this sense of entitlement in her voice, like she had every right to ask for it. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out how to handle the situation without causing a bigger issue. Should I give it to her? Should I just say no? But then it hit me. What if I could turn this into a bit of a joke? Something that would keep her out of my business for good. So I decided to take it up a notch. I decided to have a little fun with Karen. She was used to getting her way, and I wasn't about to let her walk all over me without a little pushback. So, without skipping a beat, I smiled and told her I'd happily give her the Wi-Fi password, but only if she could prove she truly needed it. The look on her face was priceless. For a moment, I saw a flicker of confusion, but then she straightened up, clearly not understanding where I was going with this. I told her I'd set up a password just for her, and to make things interesting, I even told her it would be something easy to remember. But I didn't give it to her just yet. Instead, I told her to go ahead and guess the network name, because, hey, why not make it a little game? After all, if she really wanted it that bad, surely she'd figure it out quickly. She stood there for a long time, staring at me, almost like she couldn't believe I was making her go through this. Her eyes narrowed, and it was clear she wasn't used to being challenged like this. After a few awkward moments of silence, she finally gave in and asked for the name. I almost couldn't hold back a grin when I said, "NotForKaren911. She looked at me in disbelief. It didn't take long before she was storming off, muttering about how disrespectful I was. But that wasn't the end of it. Later that day, I noticed her walking around the neighborhood, talking to some of the other residents. I didn't know exactly what she was saying, but I could tell she wasn't happy. That's when I started to realize I might have just made a bigger mistake than I thought. Would she go to the HOA about it? Would she make a scene? The tension in the air started to feel a lot thicker. I'd only just begun to deal with Karen, and I already had a sinking feeling things were about to get way more complicated. The days after the Wi-Fi stunt felt strangely quiet, but there was this nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. I kept looking over my shoulder whenever I went outside, half expecting Karen to show up at my door, or at the very least, have some kind of confrontation. But it was more than that. There was a growing sense that something was brewing just beneath the surface. The tension in the neighborhood had shifted, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had poked the hornet's nest. It wasn't long before I started hearing rumors. First, a neighbor I barely knew, Greg, stopped me while I was checking the mail. He was hesitant but eventually mentioned that Karen had been going around talking about me. Apparently, she'd been telling people how disrespectful I was, how I'd humiliated her in front of the entire neighborhood. She was pushing for action, saying that I was breaking some kind of unwritten community code by pulling pranks like that. The more I heard, the more I realized Karen wasn't just angry about the Wi-Fi name. This was personal. It wasn't about the password or the joke anymore. It was about power. She was determined to make me regret what I'd done, and I could feel her plotting something bigger. One afternoon, I saw Karen talking to the HOA president, Mr. Davidson, near the community center. They were standing just far enough away that I couldn't make out the details, but the body language said everything. Karen was pointing at something, probably her phone, showing him screenshots or something else meant to make me look bad. My stomach twisted as I realized that this could be much worse than I imagined. What was she telling them? What were they planning to do next? As I turned to walk back to my house, I couldn't help but feel a wave of dread. I had the sinking suspicion that Karen wasn't done with me yet. In fact, she might have just been getting started. The next few days felt like a countdown, with every glance from the neighbors feeling like a quiet warning. Something was coming, and I wasn't sure how I was going to stop it. The next morning, I woke up to an email notification that made my heart stop. It was from the HOA. The subject line read, "Urgent matter, violation notice." I felt a cold chill run down my spine as I opened it. Apparently, someone had filed an official complaint against me for disrupting the peace and violating community standards. The email went on to mention that Karen had reported the Wi-Fi incident, claiming that it was an act of harassment and bullying. I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? Had she actually gone this far? It didn't end there. The email also stated that there would be a community hearing to discuss the matter, where I'd be expected to defend myself. My mind raced. A hearing? Over a prank? This felt like something out of a bad movie. But I knew this wasn't just about the Wi-Fi password anymore. Karen had clearly used every ounce of influence. She had to make sure I'd pay for what I'd done. As if the HOA wasn't enough, the atmosphere around the neighborhood had become tense. People started avoiding eye contact with me, whispering when I passed by. I didn't know if they were on Karen's side or just scared of getting caught in the crossfire, but it was clear that something had shifted. The entire situation had gone from a simple prank to something much darker. Then, out of nowhere, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was messy and rushed, but the words were sharp and clear. If you think Karen is your biggest problem, you're wrong. She's just the beginning. Watch your back. My stomach dropped. Who could have sent this? Was someone else involved? Had I stirred up something much bigger than I realized? As the tension mounted, it became impossible to ignore. Someone was trying to manipulate the situation, and I had no idea who was behind it. The day of the community hearing arrived, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. It was being held in the community center, and when I walked in, I was greeted with cold stares from almost everyone in the room. Karen was sitting at the front, looking smug as ever, her arms crossed like she already had the whole thing figured out. Mr. Davidson, the HOA president, sat at the head of the table, and when I took my seat, he gave me a polite but distant nod. It was clear this wasn't going to be a friendly meeting. Karen wasted no time getting to the point. She talked about how I'd made her feel humiliated with the Wi-Fi name, and how the whole thing had disrupted the peaceful vibe of the neighborhood. I tried to speak up, to explain that it was just a joke, but every time I opened my mouth, Karen interrupted, adding fuel to the fire. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see if I'd crack. But then something unexpected happened. As Karen went on, I noticed something strange. One of the neighbors, Mr. Jackson, who had always kept to himself, stood up and cleared his throat. He said, I don't know if anyone here has noticed, but Karen's been acting a bit off lately. She's been talking about this situation with everyone, pushing the idea that it was a much bigger deal than it really was. And I've seen her outside, using her phone to take pictures of people's homes, mine included. The room went silent. Karen's face went pale as she looked over at Mr. Jackson, her eyes wide with shock. It was like the ground shifted beneath her. Mr. Jackson continued, "I've been watching her for a while, and I think she's been using the HOA to target certain people. Maybe it's not about the Wi-Fi at all." The whole room turned to Karen, who now looked like she was about to lose control. But before she could respond, another neighbor, Mrs. Pottle, spoke up. "I've been getting odd messages from her too," she said. "Little things, like you should keep your lawn tidy, or I heard your car's engine sounds off." I thought it was just her being nosy, but now Now I'm not so sure. The final blow came when Mr. Davidson, the HOA president, stood up. He looked at Karen with a stern expression and said, "We've been receiving complaints from multiple residents, Karen. It seems this whole thing might not be what you've led us to believe." Karen's face twisted in rage, but it was too late. The damage had been done. She was exposed. As the meeting concluded and everyone began to file out, I thought it was over. But as I was walking to my car, I heard a voice behind me. I turned to find Mr. Jackson standing there, a small smile on his face. "You know," he said, "you weren't the only one who noticed something was off. I've got your back. If Karen's been doing this to others, we can all stand together." I wasn't sure what to say, but his words gave me a sense of relief. Maybe this wasn't just about me and Karen anymore. Maybe it was about the whole neighborhood, standing up to someone who thought they could control everyone. But just as I was about to drive away, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, someone moving in the shadows near my house. It was a figure I didn't recognize. They were wearing a hoodie, their face obscured. I slammed the car door and quickly drove up the street, my heart pounding. Was Karen really done with me? Or was there someone else involved, someone even more dangerous, waiting for the right moment to strike? I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite everything that had just unfolded, the real story was only just beginning. I drove around the block a few times, scanning the area, but the figure I'd seen near my house was gone. My heart was still racing, but the strange feeling I'd had all along began to fade as I started to calm down. It seemed like I'd been right to trust my gut. There was something more going on here than just Karen causing trouble. Over the next few days, word spread through the neighborhood. Karen had been formally removed from her position in the HOA, and people started speaking up about the way she'd been manipulating everyone. It turned out she wasn't just focused on me. She'd been targeting several other residents for the smallest things, trying to control the neighborhood with her petty complaints. It wasn't until Mr. Jackson and a few others had the courage to speak up that her web of influence started to unravel.